Hello again! I'm here today to do a continuation of a video that I posted in April, which was my favorite classics. In that video, I mostly talked about 19th century classics, and that video seemed to get pretty good reception. Y'all seem to like it. So I thought I'd make a little series of it and kind of work my way through different time periods and pick out different favorite classics and modern classics from certain eras of time. So today I'd like to talk about my favorite books published between 1900 and 1930. I'm going to go ahead and do these in chronological order for, organization's sake. So let's get started. The first book I have is Ethan Frome by Edith Wharton. I'm sure you've heard of this. I love Edith Wharton. It was kind of a toss-up for this video whether I was going to talk about this or The Age of Innocence, but in the end I went with Ethan Frome. This is a novella. It was originally published in 1911. Edith Wharton was an American novelist, and again, most famous for this, The Age of Innocence, The House of Mirth. This is a heartbreaking little novella. You can read it definitely in one sitting. It's a harrowing tale of Ethan Frome and kind of what happens to him when his wife's cousin comes to stay with them. I'm not going to go too much more into plot because it's really short, y'all, but it's absolutely heartbreaking. Like many of Edith Wharton's works that I've read, it's a really harrowing look at how afflicted the human condition can be and how our longings can drive us to make sometimes destructive decisions. So I highly recommend this. Again, it's a little tiny thing. It's a great place to start with Edith Wharton if you're interested in getting into her. And yes, please do it. Next, I have a book that's really close to my heart, but that I rarely ever talk about on this channel, if I've ever even mentioned it. And that is Of Human Bondage by W. Somerset Maugham. This was originally published in 1913. It is quite a chunker, about 600 pages, especially when compared to Ethan Frome. Maugham, of course, was born in France, spent most of his life in England, but kind of traveled between France and the UK throughout his life. This was written and originally published in English, however. And this is a very classic Bildungsroman about a character named Philip Carey, who's born club-footed. He's an orphan, and, it's a coming-of-age tale. It kind of follows him through life. It definitely extrapolates on the power of lust, sort of, and desire, and where that can lead us. And just in general kind of talks about Philip Carey's longing to be independent and not rely on others, but to be self-reliant instead. It's very similar a little bit in themes to David Copperfield, so if you liked one, I would guess that you would probably like the other. And again, highly recommend this. This is a 5-star read for me. It's one I'm hoping to reread soon. The next book I have is by one of my favorite female authors of all time, and that is A Lost Lady. This is by Willa Cather. Willa Cather was an American author. Her stories mostly focus around small towns in the Western Plains states. And this is, again, a pretty quick read. We're looking at about 140 pages here. It's the story of Mrs. Forrester, who is the so-called Lost Lady, and her existence in a small town in the Western Plains, and about a young boy who falls in love with her when he's much younger, and kind of how their story develops. Willa Cather writes amazing female characters, which is kind of a hard thing to find in literature coming out of the early 20th century, as it was still kind of a boys' game and female authors weren't quite as well respected as they are now. Not saying that they still get all the respect they deserve, but that's another video. Again, I highly recommend this, and I have to say that if you are a fan of Edith Wharton or vice versa, I believe that Edith Wharton and Willa Cather, they're writing in the same time, out of the same country, but about different places, but I think their writing style is very similar, and I think, like I said, they both do great things with their female characters and kind of with social critique, so I definitely recommend that you pick this up. The next book that I have is Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. I unfortunately do not have a physical copy of this book. I am kind of trying to decide which collection of Virginia Woolf's books I'm going to start buying. Mrs. Dalloway was the first Woolf I've read. I've only read 2, though, and I just think that it is A, a great place to start with Virginia Woolf, and B, such a unique novel. It, of course, tells the story of the day in the life of Clarissa Dalloway, as well as a couple of other characters. And, again, it's a short read. It might not necessarily be quick, depending on how you take it in. For me, I really savored the language because Virginia Woolf is such a fabulous writer. But it is a shorter novel. And like I said, a great place to start with Woolf. I'm so looking forward to getting into more of her works. Of course, this was published in 1925. 1925 was a great year for literature, in my opinion, because my perhaps favorite book of all time was published in 1925 as well, and that is F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby. I know that this can be quite a polarizing book, but this is the book that made me fall in love with literature. It's one of the most important reading experiences I've ever had. I first read it in high school. It's when I really started to appreciate studying literature and the themes and messages that can be found in novels. So for me, it was a totally revolutionary point in my life. It's probably the reason why I went on to get a degree in English literature. I don't think I have to talk about this too much. All I can say is that if you haven't read it yet, please do, whether you end up loving it or hating it. It's a very important book, in my opinion. And lastly, leading us right into 1929, I have A Farewell to Arms by Ernest Hemingway. I do not keep it a secret that Ernest Hemingway is one of my favorite authors, despite the fact that he may be problematic. And A Farewell to Arms is my favorite of the works of his I've read yet, except maybe some of his short stories, but it's my favorite novel of his that I've read so far. So this is a World War I novel, of course. It's set in Italy and tells the story of an ambulance driver who's working for the military in Italy during the war and his romance with a nurse that he falls in love with. I think that this is incredibly beautifully written, and I know a lot of people don't like Hemingway's writing style, and I get that. I can understand that. Again, any of these classics, they're so widely read that there are going to be polarizing opinions. I actually read this for the same class originally that I read The Great Gatsby in. I've reread both of these multiple times since my high school days. You can see that I was learning how to annotate. I was so cute. Anyway, I just think that the writing is absolutely beautiful. I think that this story is really beautiful. And I'm not a big fan of war novels in general, but I think that the First World War is a really great backdrop to the story that Hemingway tells here. So, highly recommend this as well, of course. So, those are my favorite classic books published from, I said 1900, but really the first one was 1911. So, roughly 1910 to 1930. If you have any recommendations for me based on my enjoyment of these books, I would absolutely love to hear them. If you've read any of these books or these authors and would like to discuss them in the comments, as always, feel free to do so. I'd love it. And I hope that you will also tell me what your favorite classics or classic is out of this time period, because I'd love to hear about that as well. And I hope you all are having a lovely day, and I will see you soon. Bye.